A lot of what we do here at FX Medicine is made possible by the generous collaboration of our many guests and contributors. We extend our heartfelt thanks as we continue our education of evidence-based complementary medicine. This is FX Medicine. I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook. Joining us on the line again today is Dr Adrian Lopresti, who's a clinical psychologist in private practice, managing director of his own contract research organisation and senior researcher at Murdoch University, Western Australia. He's over 20 years of clinical experience working with children and adults suffering from a range of mental health conditions. He has experience in a range of psychological therapies and has received extensive training in nutritional and lifestyle treatments for mental health disorders. Dr Lopresti regularly publishes in peer-reviewed, high-impact journals on numerous disorders and has completed several clinical trials investigating the effects of curcumin, saffron and ashwagandha in the treatment of anxiety and depression in children and adults. Welcome back to FX Medicine. Adrian, how are you?
Good, Andrew. Thanks for having me back.
Now, today we're going to be discussing something that isn't often attributed to a treatment with mood disorders, depression, anxiety, and that's probiotics. So I guess we've got to start. What's the current research showing with regards to the effects of probiotics on depression and anxiety?
Yeah, the research certainly is accumulating. Certainly there's more and more interest about the gut-brain connection and its potential in terms of influencing depression and anxiety. And obviously, there's been increasing interest looking at the potential impact of probiotics as antidepressants or anti-anxiety agents. And there's some recent reviews that have been completed and published which indicate that probiotics certainly may have some benefits in improving depression in adults. There's less research in relation to anxiety, but certainly there's certainly some positive data coming out there.
One of the things that's always interested me is something I learned from being an integrative medicine practitioner, and that was 95% of our serotonin is not made in our brains. It's made in our gut by our enterochromaffin cells.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. That's the thing that often people forget to kind of keep in mind is that, yes, most of our serotonin is produced in the gut, not in the brain. Now, whether, what impact that has on cognitive function and mental health, we're not quite sure, but certainly there's lots of neurotransmitters, not just serotonin, but other neurotransmitters that are also produced in the gut, and they maybe have far-reaching health effects.
So how do probiotics work to promote or support mental health? I guess my question here is, we're talking about the gut-brain axis, but the feelings of depression and anxiety, I know the visceral effects, but the depression symptoms, if you like, are purported, or the target tissue is the brain. So there's that lag time, is it, between, what you give the gut, how does it affect the brain? I'm wondering how strong is the effect of probiotics here?
Well, the effects seem to be, so I suppose with a lot of the probiotic research that's been conducted, a lot of the research has actually been conducted on healthy individuals, and what they're looking at is, does giving probiotics improve mood in healthy individuals? Now, unfortunately, you're not going to see dramatic changes because they're already pretty, the mood is already pretty good to start off with. But those studies where they've actually used probiotics with people with clinical forms of depression, then we're actually seeing moderate effects of probiotics on mood. So certainly, it's not a magic pill, and I think it's part of an integrated, holistic approach. It could be used as an extra tool to help improve people's mood. Obviously, we need to look at other stresses that are going on. We need to look at diets, and we've got to be careful about them thinking, okay, probiotics is this magic pill that we can just give everybody. But it could be an adjunct or an additional treatment option for people who are working with mental health sufferers.
So, you mentioned diet there, and Felice Jacka has done some awesome work. Indeed, you've worked with Felice Jacka, correct?
Oh, yeah, I've written a paper with Felice, and certainly, she's done some amazing work looking at the impact of diets and the relationship between diets and depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder. So, and she's also done some really nice research looking at the Mediterranean-based diets as a treatment for depression, which came out with some really positive results.
So, then we've got the food modulating the gut microbiota. We know that a plant-based diet affects the microbiota within days. How, where do we place probiotics here, I guess, as a strategy or as a priority? The diet's got to be first, right?
Yeah, the diet's got to be, well, absolutely, the diet's got to be first. But the problem you've got is that when you're experiencing low mood or when you're experiencing anxiety, making dietary changes can be extremely difficult.
Right.
So ideally, yes, let's eat a plant-based, diet. Let's improve, drink more water. Let's increase our kind of, lean protein and good fats and things like that. But when you're struggling to get out of bed and you've got no motivation to do anything, your energy's low, you're sleep deprived, it's extremely difficult to then spend time kind of dedicating time to improving your diet. So while I absolutely believe that diet is an integral part, maybe for some people they're not quite ready yet, and that's where you can look at maybe, let's look at kind of supplements or probiotics to help them along the way. So even if probiotics could potentially improve their mood by 10%, that will then make it easier for them to incorporate dietary changes.
Gotcha. And I guess this is part of your personalised integrative therapy, correct?
Yeah, it's really looking at identifying the potential causes of what's contributing to somebody's mental health problems, whether it's diet, stress, and it needs to be very individualised. For some people, their diet's really, really good, and dedicating a lot of effort towards improving that diet even further may not result in dramatic gains.
Right.
But maybe, who knows? Maybe they've got some abnormal changes in their microbiota profile.
Mm-hmm.
Whether they've had a long history of antibiotic use or things like that. And maybe probiotics can potentially help them.
Yeah,
but we're not quite sure who probiotics work best for. We're still far. We still need to look into that in greater detail. Maybe it works better with people with digestive problems. Maybe it works better with people with a history of antibiotic use. We're not quite sure.
All right, so I'm going to ask you the question: how do you choose the right probiotic?
Well, yeah, this is the thing. It's. I mean, for me, I'm looking at, I do a really good assessment, just try to determine how much do I think the gut could potentially be impacting on mood. Where do I need to put my effort towards? Is it that there's lots of stress going on in somebody's life, and that's really where I need to dedicate my energy towards? Is it that there's other medical conditions, chronic pain or things like that maybe we need to kind of work on first? Is it some coping skills that we need to work on, or is it they're not exercising or they're not sleeping, and we need to work on that stuff first. But generally, when there's ongoing stress, you can probably pretty much assume that the gut is probably having an effect, because stress will certainly affect the microbiota. So, and it can also lead to kind of leaky gut and things like that. So if we can give something either through dietary intervention or probiotics to help kind of improve that kind of gut-brain communication, then maybe it's something worth looking at.
Okay, you mentioned assessment, and obviously there's a scale of severity there. So when would you prioritise that we really need to be looking at, acute, even pharmacological treatments over lifestyle and other interventions?
Well, I mean, when we look at kind of your pharmacological treatments, the research seems to indicate that works better for more your severe forms. And I think that when somebody's coming in with severe depression and they just lack the kind of drive or motivation or energy, to make any changes. And then that's when then certainly I think pharmaceutical medications may be of benefit initially if we can just reduce the intensity of their symptoms by 20%, for example. And then once they're at that stage, then maybe they're ready to incorporate some behavioural changes.
Mm-hmm.
So that's very individualised, and a lot of it's about me doing my assessment and going, okay, what changes do I think need to occur for this individual sitting across from me, but also then going, what changes are they able to make? What changes are they willing to make? And also, one of the things that's still, while more and more understanding about the gut-brain connection is occurring, it's still quite a foreign concept for a lot of people. How can the gut affect our mood? They're two different organs, is what people are kind of still at. So we need to make sure that we're educating people and for them to understand that how the gut can affect the brain. And I do a lot of psychoeducation first, and provide them with as much information. I've got lots of kind of resources and booklets that I give them that help them to understand why we're doing what we're doing.
I've got to say, this comes up time and time again. The well-prepared practitioner has good handouts, to give to their patients so that they themselves can take charge of their condition and be empowered. It's really important, isn't it?
Oh, it absolutely is. I mean, this is the other thing. You've got somebody who's depressed, anxious. How much are they actually hearing what I'm saying? And then how many they walk out of the office and they go, what was actually covered? And maybe they didn't hear it as much as I thought they heard. So it's really important for me to then give them some information, some written information, or even to getting them to watch videos or YouTube clips that provide some further consolidation of what we've talked about. Because they're not going to remember a lot of the stuff that we've talked about. And I have lots of clients who come in and they said they've seen other practitioners, and I go, what did you cover with them?
Yeah.
What things were discussed? And they go, I don't know. And if you can give them, I've got a workbook, tiny, just small workbooks for the gut-brain connection. I've got one for sleep. I've got one for physical activity. I've got one for diet, nutrition side of things, and just to give them just a handout that they can then take away. If they've got it there, they can refer back to it. And in there, is activities. Usually I have checklists and questionnaires that they can do to help them to incorporate changes for themselves.
And I guess this would be really important when we're dealing with conditions that require support, family support, significant others support. So these handouts would be so important in educating them so that they're aware at least of what sort of track you're taking. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So we again think about the gut-brain stuff. If we're working on the gut to improve somebody's depression, and they're going to a party and where there's family members and they go, I'm trying to eat healthy because I'm trying to improve my mood, for example. People are going to be sitting there going, well, how's that going to affect your mood? Just take an antidepressant, that will fix it. If they don't understand, they're not going to provide that support that person needs. Yeah. So it's really important that people can have the resources so they can also educate family members and other social connections and things like that. So, can I just delve a little bit into what you said there with regards to an antidepressant? These are very commonly drugs that prevent the reuptake of a neurotransmitter at the synapse, therefore leaving the neurotransmitters there at the synapse to do their job. But it doesn't make the neurotransmitter to be released. This is nutrition, isn't it?
Yeah, well, this is nutrition. This is the gut. We know that certainly, obviously you need protein and you need the nutrients, the vitamins and minerals to help to produce those neurotransmitters. And even the microbiota, we're seeing that, things that kind of degrade serotonin are stress hormones, cortisol. Yeah. And we know that the gut, the microbiome can affect levels of cortisol. So potentially by treating the gut, you're reducing cortisol, and yet therefore, as a consequence of that, you're increasing serotonin. We know that the vagus nerve can also have an impact on neurotransmitter activity, and the microbiome impacts on the vagus nerve.
Of course.
You've got The gut also affects tryptophan metabolism. So again, you target the microbiome and you're potentially increasing neurotransmitters there. The gut's a form of, it could be a form of inflammation going on. And we know that inflammation will lower serotonin production. So by potentially treating the microbiome, potentially treating the gut, you're reducing inflammation, and as a consequence, you're increasing serotonin and other neurotransmitters.
Now, of course, we're talking about the microbiome, microbiota of the gut, and a dysfunctional microbiota is what we'd call dysbiosis. Mm-hmm. Then there's this issue of, what bugs help the gut to make the neurotransmitters and what bugs are detrimental to that balance, if you like. So that comes into measurement, that comes into assessment, and I really question whether we're here yet with regards to what is a good or a normal microbiome. What's your opinion of that?
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right there. I think you're trying to identify the perfect microbiome. We're not going to be at that stage, and I think it's very culture dependent too, depending on what we're eating and things like that.
Yes.
But I think kind of the general consensus is that we need to ensure that we've got diversity in our gut microbiome.
Right.
And so if I, for example, did a test on the microbiome, I'm really kind of looking at diversity, and that's probably my initial measure there. So, but if you're looking at any particular strains or bacteria or things like that, then I think, we're certainly not there yet.
Yeah, we'd like to use the strain that works, the best strain, but it appears that the research is using vastly different species and strains here.
Yeah, this is the thing, when you're looking at probiotics, obviously if I do research on saffron for depression, I know that it's saffron that I'm giving.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're looking at some of the research on probiotics, you're looking at very different strains, the species and strains that might be kind of administered. And so is it probiotics or is it the strain that was important? And which ones should you give, and how much should you give, and for how long should you give? And we don't know. The research from general rule, if you're looking at probiotics in general, it kind of works, it needs to be given for at least 4 weeks. That's where kind of the research seems to be indicating that. Uh-huh. But I'm not confident in going, this form of probiotic is better than another one. I don't think there's enough evidence there to lean one way or the other.
Okay. What about those that might be favouring the small intestine versus the large intestine, i.e. the lactobacilli versus the bifidobacterium? That's oversimplified, way oversimplified, but just to give an idea, do you tend to choose one over the other?
Well, the one that, the review that recently came out, basically it was what they kind of concluded, and again it was, there was limited kind of research to form definitive conclusions, but what they seemed to think was that it was a combination of the lactobacilli with the bifidobacterium, for example, together. Okay. That seemed to work best, but there wasn't a lot of research there. And there's another study that that was done for women with postnatal depression, and then they looked at kind of lactobacillus rhamnosus, and that one seemed to work really well for them. But would the combination have worked even better? I don't know. Yeah.
Now, was that a particular strain of rhamnosus? Was that the GG?
That one there, the one with postnatal depression, I think it was the HN001, I think it was.
Right.
For that one, that was quite a big study that was done.
And of course, something I'm mindful of is, people with depression often have poor sleep. We know that sleep affects microbiota. So it's kind of like, where do you start? How do you tease it apart? Where do you intervene?
Yeah, that's exactly right. This is where you look at that integrative approach. It's kind of going, what potentially is going on, and we know that, we know that sleep will affect the microbiota. We know that sleep will affect neurotransmitters. We know that sleep will affect cortisol production. We know that sleep will affect inflammation. And all those factors have been associated with depression and anxiety. But then on the same, we've also, if we think about exercise, we know that exercise again does all those things too. So potentially you could treat the microbiome through exercise.
Yep.
We know that stress does all that, so you could potentially correct the microbiome by through stress reduction. So it's not just diet, although I think if you want to target the microbiome, it's through diet and obviously incorporating lots of prebiotics and things like that, food-time prebiotics. But you can certainly target the microbiome through stress reduction, through exercise, through sleep, and all those different factors.
Mm-hmm. When we're talking about diet, and I mentioned a plant-based diet, and yet there's these fermented foods as well that are favoured by certain cultures, like the kefir, the kimchi, the sauerkraut, that sort of thing. Do you tend to encourage the use of fermented foods as well as, or as a starting point, or is it more the sort of the plants, the plant intake? I go, look, here are your different options. We can kind of improve the gut-brain connection through all these different ways, and one of them is through increasing certain plant-based foods, or through fermented foods, or probiotics or prebiotics. And I kind of present that to them, and then they kind of make that decision. I mean, because I personally don't eat a lot of fermented foods, so it's, that's probably impacting on my bias. I'm kind of sitting here telling people to eat fermented foods, and I don't. Uh-huh.
Although it's probably beneficial for me to do that and for others to do that, but really it's kind of going, if some people from certain cultures, they go, fermented foods, great. I'm really interested in incorporating that, and I can definitely do that. And then you've got others who look at me weirdly.
You mean rotten plant stuff?
Yeah. Yeah. So again, it's like present the options and go, look, here are ways that we can target the microbiome.
Yeah.
And which ones are you? Well, firstly, we provide education about the connection and how we can improve the brain by improving the gut. And then once you've then done that and they understand that process and how it can potentially improve their mood, then you go, now here are some ways that we can improve your gut, and where do you want to start? And maybe it's 2 or 3 changes that they set in the first week.
Right.
And then they kind of, and they set, I'm very much into getting people to set some real specific goals, your SMART goals.
Yeah. What
is it that you're going to do this week? What changes are you going to do? And let's kind of put them down, and let's just target those first, and then they come back the following week, and we see how they've kind of progressed with that, and then we might either modify the goals or add new goals, or just depending on where they're at.
I've never heard of probiotics instigating a serotonin syndrome episode, but, what other strategies or nutrients do you favour, do you tend to use to support this gut-brain connection, i.e. the manufacture of these neurotransmitters? Like, for instance, 5-hydroxytryptophan, you mentioned tryptophan. Do you ever use these sort of agents as well as probiotics?
I personally don't use 5-HTP only because in WA, it's not a listable product. So I'm really kind of careful from an insurance point of view to certainly do that. So, the thing that we've got to keep in mind is there's several ways we can target the microbiome, and we're eating things like omega-3s. So I'm very much into, that seems to have an impact on the microbiome. So fish oils, magnesium, there's been some research there that also shows that it can alter the microbiome. So, and my theory around kind of curcumin, around its impact, its mood-enhancing effects is a lot of it is, there's an issue around bioavailability. So curcumin and saffron, maybe it works by altering the gut microbiome. So you can use herbs and spices. So it doesn't have to be, and then obviously you're altering the microbiome, and then you're reducing inflammation, and then as a result you're increasing serotonin production in the brain. Okay.
Any other nutrients or food-type medicines that you'd use?
I sometimes with some clients, particularly if they struggle with making significant changes in their diet, I'll use kind of prebiotic supplements like inulin and lactulose and things like that. So There's been some research looking at the prebiotics, the effects of prebiotics as an antidepressant, and the research hasn't been that great. But again, those studies have been on healthy people and looking at their mood-enhancing effect in healthy people. So whether the use of prebiotics in people with clinical depression or clinical anxiety can have an effect. But I think simply adding. I often get my clients to actually have what I call a mood boosting smoothie every day. So where they put some protein in, they put some inulin powder or whatever it is they might use, berries and healthy fats, and they just kind of create a nice smoothie that's potentially increasing your B vitamins and your proteins, but also providing some nourishing food for the gut.
With regards to research on healthy individuals, look, I can understand with a drug you want to show a pharmacological effect, i.e. a forcing of that agent to change biochemical processes. But when we're talking about foods which nurture and nourish our system, they don't force us to do stuff. I wonder about the relevance of doing research on, say, a probiotic in a healthy individual who doesn't necessarily need it.
Well, I think a lot of that has got to do with the claims that companies can make, unfortunately. I think that if you use an ingredient on a clinical population, you can't make claims. So the research has to be done on a healthy population so that the way the company can make claims on their product. And so if I'm trying to, if I'd had an ingredient and I did a study on people with clinical depression, the TGA is not going to allow me to make claims on that group because they were a clinical group. I can only make claims and say, look, this has mood, can improve mood in healthy individuals. So this is the problem that we have, is that if you want to make claims from a supplement point of view, you need to do it in a healthy population.
That seems nonsensical, doesn't it?
It does. It does. Yeah, this is the problem. A lot of the studies, if you are a company and you're going, okay, I want to do a clinical trial on my product, if you use a clinical population, then you're not going to be able to make therapy, because you can't make those higher-end claims.
So let's go into that. When you're looking at research that's been done on probiotics, and you're saying, okay, well, this is a fair trial, that's a fair trial. Do you look at these and pick them apart and look at bias and things like that? Yeah,
I mean, absolutely. You have to. The problem we've got is that it can be quite difficult if you don't know how to kind of read research and try to understand the study design and kind of pick at it, and even the statistical analyses that they use. You need to have a bit of a background to be able to understand that. And I certainly do. When I'm seeing a study, I'm seeing a paper, I'll read through the paper and go, okay, what was the design like? What analyses did they use? And obviously, who funded the company, who funded the study. But the problem with that is that, who else is going to fund the study? So there's always going to be that element there. But was it a good design study? And was it, and are the conclusions appropriate? And you've got to be careful, because sometimes I see on the internet, that this ingredient had a significant effect on mood or whatever it might be, and then I look at the study and it was a really weak study. That's where you need to make sure that if you see a study, you see some of the claims, just look into it in a bit more detail. I think it's very difficult to make conclusions on open label studies. So there's no placebo control or some type of control group, because we know that just the passage of time results in improvements in mood. So if I see, I've seen, for example, some ones on magnesium, which I believe that magnesium has benefit. But a lot of the studies are open label studies, and I know from my work, from my research, that just putting people on placebo, they get 20 to 30% better. So we need to make sure that there's some type of control group. Yeah,
and I guess, you're in a particular profession where, because you're dealing with emotions, placebo is going to be a massive impact, isn't it?
Yeah, certainly placebo there's research showing that placebo actually kind of changes certain hormones and things like that. So we're seeing that effect. And the other thing that happens is just the passage of time. The research shows that, I think the figures are that 20 to 30% of people with depression will experience a remission over 3 months just with the passage of time.
Gotcha.
So, and then over a year, about 50% of people will experience a remission in their depressive symptoms over a year. So a lot of people just get better with time. Now, whether that's things that they then change or whether the stressor that was triggering the depression or anxiety has been resolved, but time's a pretty effective treatment too.
Can I just go back to other things that you use, other strategies to support the gut-brain connection? What about soothing foods or even soothing herbs? And I guess I'm thinking here with regards to, for instance, gastrointestinal upset with anxiety. You're not necessarily treating the anxiety, but you're soothing the GI upset. Do you tend to favour those sort of foods and herbs like soups or, herbal formulae with bitter candy tucked in them? That sort of thing?
Yeah, I think, I've talked about the micro dysbiosis and potentially that effect on mood. And then obviously there's your gut inflammation and there's your leaky gut, which also some research is indicating that people with depression and anxiety have your leaky gut. Mm-hmm. So it's really important to provide those soothing foods and even supplement formulas, things like your glutamines and your aloe veras and things like that. There's different combinations of those herbal ingredients, which can be quite soothing, anti-inflammatory for the gut and may potentially help improve intestinal permeability or that leaky gut. So absolutely, I think that could be a component of someone's intervention for sure.
And we were mentioning before about the various doses, strains, species in the various products, the plethora of products that are coming out on the market now with regards to probiotics for the use in depression and anxiety. So what's your preference? Do you go in hard or do you gently nudge things along?
With the probiotics, you mean? Yeah, well, with the probiotics, at the moment I'm probably choosing one with multiple strains in there. So that's where I'm kind of leaning towards at the moment. There's been a couple of studies for depression where they've used, just for people, there's the Lactobacillus helveticus R0052,
right,
and the Bifidobacterium longum R0175. There's been a couple of some nice studies looking at those for depression. So if there's a product that contains those strains, I might kind of lean towards that one there.
Yeah.
There's a really interesting study which was published and looking at the probiotic treatment for bipolar disorder.
Oh.
And this one here was really interesting because what they did was people after they were released, or they went to hospital for because of the manic episodes or the depressive episode, and then they were given, after they left hospital, they were given a probiotic for 24 weeks, and they wanted to look at rehospitalisation over that 24-week period. And what they found was that by giving them the probiotic, it reduced the rates of rehospitalisation. So I think I've got here that it was 24 people on the placebo were rehospitalised over this period versus only 8 on the probiotic. So a significant reduction in rehospitalisation, and even the length of stay in hospital was significantly lower. So the people on the probiotics, they stayed in hospital for about 8 days, and the people on the placebo stayed in hospital for about 8 days, and then those people on the probiotic were only in there for about 3 days. So it reduced the rehospitalisation rate and the length of time in hospital. And the one they used was Lactobacillus rhamnosus strain GG.
Yep.
And the Bifidobacterium strain BB12. So there's nice study there. I'm happy to send you the links to that.
Yeah, I'd love to put them up on the FX Medicine website. I was also noting the species and strains that you mentioned was in a paper by Wallace that I was looking at, that effects of probiotics on symptoms of depression, the Helveticus and the Bifidobacterium longum. Yeah, so that's great.
Yeah. So there's been, I think, a couple of studies on those combinations. So yeah, I mean, and look, I'm not. And if you can find them and can use them, then great. Otherwise, I just kind of go, okay, let's look at a good quality company with some good strains in there and mix it up and see how we're going to go from there.
What about probiotic-containing foods, yogurts?
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly if we can get people to have, for a lot of people that might be the starting point is things like yogurt. I'm not overly confident about your I think can you buy your kimchi drinks in Woolworths and things like that these days? I'm not sure how great they are.
Give me the kimchi.
Or kombucha. I can't remember. I think it was kombucha.
Oh, I see. Yeah, you can buy kombucha.
Yeah. But I don't know. Once they, how much are they?
What's the therapeutic value? Yeah.
But if people can make their own, and they can't ask me for the recipe because I've got absolutely no idea how to do it.
Well, with kimchi, there was something like 110 official recipes. So,
oh, really?
Yeah, something like that. So, further resources, Adrian. Like you've got your personalised integrative therapy, and you run that as a course for people interested. Is that only available to psychologists?
Yeah, no. It's certainly it's available to anybody who's interested, who works with people with depression and anxiety. I've got a 2-day course that I've specifically developed for people with mental health practitioners. I'll probably design one more so for your naturopathic practitioners, because I think the course needs to change a little bit. But I'll probably start that in 2020 or something like that.
Gotcha.
So. And then I've also got a workbook that I've developed that's got lots of exercises and resources in there, and I've also got little workbooks that just target different modules. So if you want to then give people just the information on the diet, or if you want to just give them a little workbook on the gut-brain connection, then you can certainly you can purchase them and give them to your clients.
I've got to tell you that I've looked at your session 1 in your workbook. You may not know about this, and it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. You've done really good work here.
Yeah, I've got a study that I'm doing at the present moment. We're at week 9 at the moment of the study, and we're examining the effects of the personalised integrative approach for the treatment of people with depression and anxiety, and we're comparing the integrative approach with cognitive behaviour therapy. It's only a small pilot study, but we've got 3 groups. We've got a cognitive behaviour therapy group, a PI therapy group, and a PI therapy plus supplements group. And we're comparing changes over time in relation to mood, but also even dietary changes and physical activity changes and sleep changes, and seeing how they kind of go. So I hope that by early next year we can have that study published.
I really would like to give you an accolade here, and that is I'm so impressed by the way that you like to bring objective measures into how you're assessing change in your patients. Because particularly when we're looking at a strategy like probiotics, unless you're in the research world, it's very not often looked at in an objective manner. And it just impresses me how you like to say, okay, well, what is the percentage increase or decrease in symptoms, so that you can track the data over a period of time and say, yes, this is a valuable tool in your armamentarium to help people with mood disorders or not. I love it. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Well, we've got lots of options that, and I think it's good if you can have some objective measures that you can also, that you can share with your clients, and that provides some good feedback for them too, because it's also very difficult. If your mood drops by 20% and you're still depressed, it's very difficult to notice that. It might be, I'm better, but I can't remember how bad I was 2-3 weeks ago. If we can kind of go, look at the changes that are occurring over time, gradually over time, it can be useful to have those objective measures.
Yeah, well done. Adrian Lopresti, thanks so much for taking us through the options, the therapeutic options that we have now for depression, anxiety with regards to probiotics.
No problem. Thanks for having me, Andrew.
This is FX Medicine. I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook. FX Medicine is your gateway to news, resources and information on the safe, evidence-based approach to practicing complementary and integrative medicine. Visit fxmedicine.com.au to sign up for e-news and stay up to date with the latest research, podcasts and industry information.